Well, 6 months, initially. But it depends how the research is going, whether we can find what we are looking for, or if it goes really well, said Cecilia, hoping that she wasn't blushing. That always gave her away. Tipex, Libby's black cat, slinked onto her lap and began to purr, looking up for the corresponding fuss that usually followed. Blimey, that's a long time. But I suppose you can come back for weekends and hols. What is it you're researching? Or can't you tell me? Official Secrets Act? Something like that, said Cecilia, reaching over to the Rioja and refilling her glass. Working in the patent office means we have 3 lots of confidentiality, over the research for the office, between the office and the clients taking out patents, and interdepartmental confidentiality. She was glad she'd done her homework. The internet was a true marvel of the modern age. Gosh. That does sound important. Plenty of responsibility then? Bet the pay's good? Cecilia nodded. Dumbledore had told her that once they'd worked out a way of easily exchanging wizard money for mole money, he'd get it put straight into her bank. And the best thing is, I don't know exactly what I'm going to be doing yet. Not in detail. I've met the bloke I'm going to be working with though, said Cecilia, thinking of Snape. He's going to take some getting used to. Reminds me of Mr. Simmons. Not Sonorous Simmons, the foghorn of the history department? Do you remember us being kept in detention when he didn't believe that we had handed in our homework because he lost it? Then spent the whole time bellowing down the phone to some poor parent? Cecilia laughed. Yep. Sonorous Simmons. Yes. This fellow's very much like Simmons, looks wise that is. Doesn't sound like him, though, Cecilia mused. Sounds just like the actor who played the Sheriff of Nottingham on Robin Hood Prince of Thieves. Cut your heart out with a spoon. Why a spoon, cousin? Why not a sword or an axe? Because it's dull, you idiot, it'll hurt more. Quoted Libby. They both laughed. Yes. It was definite, thought Cecilia. They were both 16 again. And by God, she does a good impression of Snape. They sat there chatting for a while, talking about Nick coming round in the morning to drop off some glassware and the quips he'd make about Amy staying to look after her house. They laughed about school and UNI, the time they made their way to the caretaker's office and into the cellar to the air raid shelters. Cecilia tripping over down the steps of the hall, breaking her ankle, which had resulted in her being taken to Auntie. They greeted Derek as he came in the door with giggles and chuckles like they were sharing a joke and no one else was invited. Derek just rolled his eyes knowingly and made himself some supper. And soon the inevitable came, the one Cecilia had known would come. About Tim, and how she was feeling. The atmosphere tensed a little, just briefly as Libby asked how she felt about going away for the job. What could she say? All she knew was that it seemed right. Every time I think about it, I feel so regretful. Just thinking how my life could have worked out, and what could have become of us. I imagined us sitting together in our old age, still at number 5. She paused, seeing Libby's eyebrows raise. Libby liked the nice things in life and worked hard for them. Cecilia on the other hand was happy as long as it worked, did its job. Her house worked, and she'd been blissfully happy there with Tim, for 7 years of their married life. Watching our grandchildren run around, me scolding my daughter-in-law for bringing up little rascals. She sighed, reflecting on what might have been. You say all this, said Libby carefully. And you're still happy to go away. A new life, in London? New friends, new people? Are you sure you don't want to stay here a bit longer? Maybe it's moving too fast for you. Cecilia knew his game. They'd played so many times before. Devil's advocate. But she'd anticipated this. It had helped her in making her mind up in the first place. Yes, you're right in so many ways, said Cecilia, sighing. There are so many reasons to stay, and try to pick up the pieces. go back to teaching and try to rebuild the picture of my life." She paused, and looked Libby straight in the eyes. "But it'd be like trying to assemble a jigsaw when I don't have enough pieces. It'd look okay from a distance, but there'd still be gaps, and it wouldn't be quite the same picture as it was before. No, I need a break from this," she continued, sipping from her glass, and setting it down. "The job's only temporary, and like you said when I went for the interview, it's what'd do me good." Libby leaned across to her friend, and hugged her, splashing Cecilia with a bit of wine. "I know, love," she said. "You're right. I'm going to miss you so much." They hugged again, the same hug they'd shared when Libby had been dumped by Richard Fellows when she was 14. The same one they'd shared when Cecilia was about to get married to Timothy Frobisher, the hottest thing since sliced toast. Libby had such a way with words. When Freya had been born, like a little pea, identical to her mother in every way. Here they were again. If only Mrs. Bailey had realized the implications of seating the form alphabetically so Elizabeth Walsh sat next to Cecilia Wells. 88,888,888. Soon afterwards, Cecilia left, taking the quick way home. She declined a lift from Derek. It was still just light, though failing fast. Libby had complained about no having a phone number for her, but Cecilia had left her the contact address, and promised to call regularly. The lovely heat of the day had cooled, and it was now refreshing. Giddied a little by the wine, and the angst she would feel leaving her friend, she strode on, thinking of shared things past. Her mind wallpapered the pastel yellow canvas trimmed with pale pink flowers of the kind her favorite school writing paper had been. She was not as aware of her surroundings as she should have been, and, if she hadn't knocked her toe against a stone on the path a few hundred yards from her house, bringing her to her senses, the event that were to follow that evening might have been totally different, and this story might have ended here and now. It was almost midnight when she got in, and she didn't notice at first that something was wrong. She kicked off her shoes in the hall, and threw her coat and bag on the telephone table chair. Damn, she thought, some wine on my top. She quickly pulled it over her head and headed for the cloakroom toilet and, filling the sink with cold water, plunged the offending top into it. Satisfied she would sort it out in the morning, she left it, now wearing her jeans and a camisole top. What bust! She'd often told herself buying underwear. A cool breeze tickled her skin. She looked at the front door and confirmed to herself that she had shut it. Then she glanced down the hall. It was then that she noticed the back door window pane was smashed clean through. There was glass all over the floor, and there was soil, which looked very much like it had come from her rose beds, was all over the place. Then she noticed the light was on at the back of the house. She hurried in and in horror, looked at the chaos that had been her living room. Books were strewn all over the place, the settees had lost their cushions, the constable, print in frame from Boots, was ripped in half. She glanced at the fireplace and her gaze confirmed it. The only thing Cecilia had allowed herself to keep of her and Tim on their wedding day. Not only smashed but also the picture completely destroyed. Upstairs was the same. Her bedroom had been totally turned upside down, the covers were everywhere. Her dressing table was on its side, and the clothes were off their hangers out of the wardrobe. Cecilia gripped her door handle, trying to think what to do. Call the police, a voice in her head told her. She really wanted to call Libby, but she knew she'd be sound asleep by now with Derek, and little Freya between them. A few silent gasps racked her body, and she sat on the stairs, trying to compose herself. It was only stuff, she tried telling herself. The TV and stereo were still there, and there were good ones too, and it didn't look like they'd taken much. Making her way towards the hall, she nearly jumped out of her skin when she heard two cracks, one after the other from the vicinity of the kitchen. What the heck? She thought, wondering what on earth it was. Right, she thought, grabbing the umbrella out of the hall stand. If they're still here they won't be walking after I've finished with them. They're not going to break my Wedgwood too. She crouched down by the stairs, trying to hear their conversation. It was lucky she wasn't here. Black could have killed her. Never. You know he's done it before, Moody. And you've not done anything you've regretted ever in your life. The reply was more of a growl than speech. Fletcher, said the first voice, appearing to ignore the last comment. I don't know why Dumbledore still trusts him. My spellbook could do a better job. Dumbledore will be furious. It's set us back months, years. Dumbledore? The realization dissipated through Cecilia's brain much like food coloring in water, and it wouldn't be until the morning that she'd realized how silly she must have looked marching into her own kitchen half-dressed holding an umbrella. Mrs. Frobisher, Snape began eyeing her up and down, but the other wizard interrupted. I am sorry to meet you in such circumstances. My name is Moody, Alastor Moody. Cecilia said nothing, and looked between the wizard who had just introduced himself as Moody and Snape. She noticed with a little alarm that one of Moody's eyes moved around its socket more dynamically than ordinary eyes. It was as if he was trying to see things that weren't there. Do you know who's done this? Asked Cecilia. She was shaking, mostly through shock, but with a bit of annoyance thrown in. Moody stopped his surveying of the room and looked back at her. The wizard who was supposed to be guarding you whilst you were at home appears to have left his post for some reason, he said carefully. Some reason? You know he's trying to bootleg something or other. Snape turned and looked at Cecilia, whose anger was rising at the thought of her being followed. He continued, it was for your own protection, he clarified, as if this explained the situation. My own protection? Well, a fine job of protection that was. Look at the state of my house which, under the circumstances if you think about it, is exactly why we considered you needed protection. However, the choice of order member for this shift was somewhat dubious. Snape glanced sideways at Moody. They're not here now, whoever it was that broke in. Moody was surveying the kitchen again. But we only just missed them. HMPH, said Snape, looking stern. Well, more stern than usual, thought Cecilia, and despite herself, began to laugh uncontrollably, and sank down on one of the kitchen chairs. She looked up a few seconds later as Moody muttered something under his breath. He waved his wand, and the shelf of cookery books that had been hanging up by only one bracket, made itself perpendicular to the wall. Cecilia didn't have the heart to mention that it had been like that for at least the last 6 months. We would like you to come back with us to headquarters, said Moody, matter-of-factly. No, said Cecilia. I'm not leaving. And besides, I'm expecting someone to call tomorrow with some equipment we're going to need. She looked at Snape, trying to convey the importance of what she had said. Someone from the Order must stay with you. We cannot guarantee your safety otherwise, said Moody. If whoever broke into your house tonight returns, they may even kill you. His last comment didn't appear to have had the effect he was looking for. I was actually coming to meet Mrs. Frobisher tomorrow so we could begin work, cut in Snape. Perhaps it would be wise if I stay with her? Hold on, before we go into all that, I'd actually like some answers, said Cecilia, still shaking. Who's broken in? Do you know? And why? Neither of the wizards answered, and they glanced across between one another. No, none of that, said Cecilia, getting to her feet again. I've had just about enough of sidelong glances. I put up with it when I was at your headquarters, but this is my house. I heard you say something about someone called Black. Who's he? Cecilia, said Snape, softly. If you would permit me to stay with you here for your protection, I'll answer any questions you have. Well now, just a minute, began Moody, but Snape had turned to Cecilia, who nodded. Moody looked between her and Snape. Then he disapparated. Cecilia sank back into her chair, and hung her head a bit. The evening had gone so well, but now she felt dreadful. Did she even want to leave now? She sighed. Then Snape interrupted her thoughts. "You've had a dreadful shock, Cecilia," he said. "Why don't you make some tea? I'll get the place sorted out for you." To illustrate his point, he waved his wand towards the window and said, "Fenestra reparo." The glass inside hopped together neatly, as if the smash was happening in slow motion. "That would be great, Severus," she sighed, then added, "but after that, no more magic. I've had just about all I can take for one night." 10 minutes later they were sitting around Cecilia's kitchen table drinking the tea she'd made. It had taken Snape only about 5 minutes to put the house back in order. The rest of the time he spent watching Cecilia make the tea, bearing an expression of slight fascination. "Right," said Cecilia. "What's all this about? And why were the muddy animal prints in the hall?" She'd noticed them when Snape had begun magicking away the damage. "Cecilia," he said, in a low, gravelly voice. In a different person, it might be described as relaxing, she thought. You could be so very easily be beguiled, hypnotized by it. I gave you due warning that your work might put you in danger. However, you neglected to tell me that was I to return home, I could possibly be attacked. Please be straight with me, Severus, she sighed. It was far too late to be doing this. But the caffeine in the tea was slowly permeating her nervous system and she'd perked up a bit. Despite what you might think of me personally, Severus, I would like some straight, honest answers. I think you owe me that. Or else I can't see a way around us working together, she thought. Before I start, may I ask you, Cecilia, he said, leaning closer to her. Did you take or were you given anything when you were at the headquarters? Yes, actually I did. Remus gave me an old book of his with mole stories in and said I could keep it, so I brought it home with me. Why? Snape looked at her, as if she had just said a rude word. Did he tell you anything about the book? Not as such. There was silence. Cecilia kept quiet and trusted he would fill it. Her trust was not in vain. It has been thought for a long time now that there was a fundamental link between wizards and moles in the way that wizards access magic and the way moles use science. This is what Dumbledore believes will come from our collaboration with moles who practice science. He paused and rose from his seat. There appears to be clues as to what that link may be, the nature of it. Something it is strongly believed has been passed down through wizard folklore. Elements remain as grains of truth running through these stories. Like mysterious mythology, said Cecilia, rising. It was getting a bit chilly, so she pulled a throw from the bottom shelf of the kitchen cupboard and wrapped it round her shoulders, and sat back down. The book to which you refer, that was given to you, began Snape, in tones of pure granite, is the oldest known volume of wizard fables in written form. The book you had, was nearly 1,000 years old. Cecilia looked at him aghast, mouth forming a little O of amazement. But, said Snape, turning his back on her, the work we have all been doing towards this has been wasted. Thanks to Fletcher, now either the enemy has the book, or a wizard so arrogant he thinks nothing of endangering your life and all our work since the Dark Wizards have been active again. He turned back to face Cecilia again. No, said Cecilia, quietly. Sorry? Asked Snape, standing next to her. For someone who claims to be an intelligent mole, you don't appear to understand the bigger picture. What is the bigger picture? Would you care to enlighten me? Cecilia was annoyed. How dare he talk to her like that? Well, as you know, your house was broken into and the book was taken. And how do you know that? She stood up, throw discarded. That is clearly what the break-in was for. Surely you could have worked that one out for yourself. Fine, said Cecilia. But aren't you forgetting there might be another explanation? Like? he intoned, as if he was trying to explain his point to a child. Instead of replying, she exited the kitchen only to return with her handbag. She opened it in front of him. Mysterious Mythology sat amongst crumpled tissues, her purse and Freya's drawing. No words passed between them for a few minutes. Then Cecilia said, "I think we need to work on our communication skills if we are going to be working as part of a team." She looked at him, his eyes still displaying a certain shred of disbelief. His eyes met hers. "I include myself in that," she added. Snape sat down next to her, still staring at the book, and sipped at his tea, which was now cold. He waved his hand absently over the top and steam evolved over the rim. "So that's both of us that have had a shock tonight," thought Cecilia. "I'll let that sleight of hand pass." "Can you tell me, Severus?" Snape looked up sharply at her when she said his name. "Why this book is so important?" "I just told you." "No, you told me that it is probably the key to the link between wizard magic and Muggle science. You didn't say how exactly this would involve us, as a team, I mean. How is it involved with our research?" Snape held eye contact with her, then began to explain. "I am not sure whether Dumbledore wishes you to know this information yet. However, he doesn't know that you were foresighted enough to keep this with you. A quality Dumbledore trusts in anyone I have seen working for him, for the Order. The dark magic which has come to rule our time, Cecilia, affects not only wizards, but Muggles." That she already knew. Didn't Dumbledore speak of that a few days ago? How simple they sounded then. How full of ominous depth did they sound now? Snape looked back at Mysterious Mythology and continued. "Even you have been affected by this. At the heart of the dark magic is someone so powerful his like has never been seen before. His contempt of Muggles is well known, in the wizarding world, that is. However, the reason why he despises them so deeply we have only just begun to investigate." He looked back at Cecilia, who had folded her arms around herself. Snape moved closer to her. "Here is the point of what I am trying to tell you, Cecilia. When I talk about this, it may not yet become apparent its significance. But this is only because you have experienced the wizarding world for such a short amount of time." He means it, she thought. He didn't add that last bit on for my benefit, or out of politeness or duty. There is a boy, a young man now. When he was a baby, the Dark Lord tried to kill him and his family. His parents were murdered. However, he survived and some of the powers of the Dark Lord were transferred to him. He paused, waiting for it all to sink in before continuing. We have a vague idea that it was something to do with the bond with his mother that prevented him from also being murdered. However, we need to look at the nature of his powers, those he inherited. We believe if we can remove his powers, we can use them as a weapon to fight the Dark Lord. Like immunization, said Cecilia, quietly. Her mind had been operating on another level while Snape had been talking. It seemed to her that there was some kind of immunity that this boy had. Maybe that's where part of the answer lay. What's that?" asked Snape, frowning. "It's where, when you have a cut, and if bacteria entered the cut, you may have an infection which your body's immune system tries to fight." "What? Sorry, Cecilia, you've lost me." "Your body's immune system." "My body is what?" "Oh dear," thought Cecilia. "I think this is what Dumbledore may have been talking about," she said slowly. "Agreed," Snape conceded. "That comes to where we are going when we leave tomorrow." "Not back to Grimmauld Place?" Snape stood up, and Cecilia followed his gaze. "We are going back to the wizarding school where I work. It's the summer holidays and there aren't any students in. I need to teach you magic, the principles, at least. You need to teach me science." She nodded in agreement. That made sense, thought Cecilia. Then we can start off on common ground. Suddenly she felt a lot better, despite finding out she was now working in a war zone. "That explains the dark wizards," said Cecilia. "Who's black, then?" Snape's face paled, and his face turned to thunder. Cecilia really thought he was going to hit something. "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to," she said, more to break up the atmosphere that had just been created. "If you don't mind, Cecilia, I would prefer to be left now, and I expect you must be tired. Perhaps we could leave it there?" "Certainly," said Cecilia. "Nick's coming quite early tomorrow in any case, and I feel shattered. Would you like to go to bed?" Snape's face froze. If she hadn't felt so exhausted, Cecilia might have found the situation quite amusing. "I mean, I've got a spare room upstairs that you're quite welcome to use." "Thank you for the kind offer, Cecilia, but I think under the circumstances I'd rather stop up." "Well, if there's anything you need, just help yourself. It's the least I can do." She got up from the table and picked up Mysterious Mythology. "Cecilia," said Snape, a little shyly, "if that were possible. Thank you for the offer. Sleep well." "Night," she said simply, and left him to himself.